thank you. These are just some thoughts on myth. The strangest achievements of modernism and postmodernism are beige, white, clean surfaces compared to the sheer mind fire. Repetition, symbolism, uncanny depths, outrageous experimentalism, formal and structural daring of the old stories, the good stories, from when human beings weren't so sure of what was above us and what was below us, what was between us and the beasts. There's a tiny little fly. I don't want to kill it. Between us and the beasts, between us and the gods. Some of these modern remixes, or versions, or retellings are, with notable exceptions, flat as a pancake. None of them would last 5 minutes around a fireside. If I worry about something a lot, I know it's something I'm interested in, and I worry about myth. Because myths are pernicious things. Myths are weapons as much as they're glue in a community. Myths are what we were doing for millions of years, paused in evolutionary development but romping ahead in cultural terms. The full inexplicable range of the human brain, more complex and nuanced than 1,000 supercomputers. Empathy, jealousy, flirtation, one-upmanship, grudge, irony, mime, ritual, barter, revenge, the effortless stuff, the inexplicable stuff. The myths are the handbook to this behaviour. They unwind the lie of progress, because we've always been like this. Things change, but we don't. I'm interested in how dangerous some mythologizing is and how daft. The entire planet suffers now catastrophically from the two most pernicious myths ever circulated, imbibed and weaponized. The first is the myth of human superiority, and the second is the myth of white supremacy. Both are ludicrous and both are lethal. Closer to home, some gloriously stupid myths power the tragic macho moped of modern Britain. The myth of English racial purity, the myth of British exceptionalism, the myth of a migrant-free economy. The storytellers are culpable. One day's front page news is next day's fish paper, is next generation's origin myth. Something which is laughable, a lie, becomes a livable set of justifications. I'm interested, therefore, in how cliché clings to myth and how they sometimes shrug each other off. Mythic residue on the realist tradition, socio-economic function traced in the very earliest stories. There's a survival reason why one person told another that there were giants in those hills that would eat your children, or poison your crops, or come for your jobs. I'm interested in the thin, generative, and very risky membrane between myth and doctrine. Both can be intellectual, and both can be anti-intellectual. One might be used to assault or undermine the other. I'm interested also in the erotic appeal of myths. If we're analytical or deconstructivist about the apparatus of mythologizing, then we need to speak openly to one another about what turns us on. I'm a Celtic metaphysic, fetishist, wannabe druid, Robin Hood fantasist, neo-pagan ghost believer. I've come clean to you about this, Stephen. My myth, my rules. Myth delivers ecstasy. Karen Armstrong said, "We seek out moments of ecstasy when we feel deeply touched within and lifted momentarily beyond ourselves. At such times, it seems that we are living more intensely than usual, firing on all cylinders, inhabiting the whole of our humanity." Religion has been one of the most traditional ways of attaining this ecstasy, but if people no longer find it in temples, synagogues, churches or mosques, they look for it elsewhere. In art, music, poetry, rock, dance, drugs, sex, sport. Like poetry and music, mythology should awaken us to rapture, even in the face of despair that we may feel at the prospect of annihilation. If a myth ceases to do that, it has died. It is therefore a mistake to regard myth as an inferior mode of thought, which can be cast aside when human beings have attained the age of reason. Ultimately, as a writer who deeply distrusts the age of reason, and even more so the age of information we now live in and its implications for the human soul, I am most interested in myth as a door opener, doors from here to elsewhere. In the novel or the poem as a whole, or in the paragraph, or in the line, or in the use of a single word, or syntax, or grammatical, or punctuation movement. I want freedom of movement. I want it in the text as much as I want it in the world. In my first book, I had a crow who was a portal to the multifunctionary intrusion of mythic power into domestic realism. There is no answer as to what he is or what he's here to do. To read him solely as a metaphor for grief would be a shame. It would be a limiting of his mythic potential, like the Odyssey being a straightforward hero quest. To read the Odyssey that way, you've stripped it of culture. You've muted the song. The Odyssey is many things. It's a story about a selfish prick. It's a story about waste. It's a fable. It's a pacifist treatise. It's a proto-feminist condemnation of ruling elites. Or it's none of those things. It's just a hero quest. What I most like about myths, folk tales, fairy tales is the interpretive space afforded by the gamesmanship of these shifting registers, most importantly between real and not real. The earliest literature was not fixed in this way, it was fluid. It was therefore collaborative with its audiences. The oral tradition meant a different tale in every telling. My hope is that some of the political potential is available to literary material through hybridity. By juxtaposing different forms and styles and elevating ambivalence and ambiguity, literature can include this interpretive play potential which is inherent in myth and the collaborative space of silence. Poetry does this well already and does it, I think, by its very nature. Fiction, less so. Perhaps because of the mannerisms of the novel, its conventions and constrictions, perhaps because of the bodily and practical demands of the novel and how they translate to the page. By which I mean, to imbibe a novel, you have to sit on your own in a chair for 16 or 17 hours. That makes it quite distinct as a form of entertainment. The Crow in my book wants to highlight how fraudulent distinctions are between prose, poetry, play script, fiction, essay, joke, memoir. It's his mythic longevity that gives him the freedom to do this, but also, to some readers, might render him ludicrous. I'll read you a bit of him. In other versions, I'm a doctor or a ghost. Perfect devices, doctors, ghosts and crows. We can do things other characters can't, like eat sorrow, unbirth secrets, and have theatrical battles with language and God. I was friend, excuse, deus ex machina, joke, symptom, figment, spectre, crutch, toy, phantom, gag, analyst, and babysitter. I was, after all, the central bird at every extreme. I'm a template. I know that, he knows that. A myth to be slipped in, slip up into. Inevitably, I have to defend my position, because my position is sentimental. You don't know your origin tales, your biological truth, your deaths, mosquito bites mostly, your lives, denial. I'm reluctant to discuss absurdity with any of you who have persecuted us since time began. What good is a crow to a pack of grieving humans? A huddle, a throb, a saw, a plug, a gate, a load, a gap. In my new book, I have not moved on. I write about the mythic voyeur. He watches a village. He listens to the village and is extremely turned on by the daily chatter of the place. He is obsessed with one person in particular, a child. He's been in this place as long as it has been a place, but he pokes fun at the very idea that any human might make a claim on it. He is nature. Again, I want all the doors open. I want simultaneity in the literary function, and I want a non-realist element. I want him to be a metaphor for the bardic tradition, but I also want him to be post-myth. I want him to be after this discussion. I want him to be able to see what he's a part of. I want him to be self-knowing and kitsch. I want him to represent threat and danger. I want the reader to have to think with no easy solution in mind, whether he is a figment of the child's imagination or, more interestingly, the adults as they think about childhood imagination. Whether he represents predatory behaviour, or is a mirror of childhood innocence, or a representation of the very fraudulence of the idea of childhood innocence. I want him to move according to who is thinking about him, or speaking of him, and I want this to happen long after the final page has been read. My hope is that the mythic element bleeds into the domestic, or the political, or the emotional, polluting as it goes. My hope is that this is how a text worries its reader, and is therefore interesting to its reader. He has been represented on keystones, decorative stencils, tattoos, the cricket club logo. He has been every English trinket and trash, moral for cash, mascot and curse. He has been in story form in every bedroom of every house in this place. He is in them like water, animal, vegetable, mineral. They build new homes, cutting into his belt, and he pops up adapted to scare and defy. In this place, he is as old as time. There is no such thing as Gilgamesh. Gilgamesh is a mirror. Literature is a way of telling each other about the world so that what was unknown can be known. And we attempt this together. It never stops, and it is never not utterly vital. It is, I think, humanity. Once upon a time there was an English mole. I say mole, I mean vole, or guilty black hole. Not so much a mole as a disaffected young teacher, or a sheet of important papers, or a strategy session in a wine bar with Giles, or a traffic jam, or a lie as big as a bus, or the idea of an island which grew its own people. I say mole, I mean Arthur, or Uther, or Oswald, or George. Love of country was her name. I have no love for this country was her name. She could see and was hungry. He could not reconcile the deep appreciation, the lusty, unquenchable affection she felt for the landscape of this country with the political history and pleasant of the place, which she found revolting. This mole was caught between this love and this inability to love, and he felt they must reach around and become one. They must be the same thing. They smelt the same, if the mole was being honest. I say mole, I mean populace oblivious to propaganda, self-interest or personal gain, an animal made of millions, released from the dark tunnels of capitalism's dying gasps, a beast, a myth, a joke. I say mole, I mean national trust, natural freedom pass for the national bus, a national fuss, I mean an acre of English ground, a sugar-coated dacre homeward bound. I say mole, I mean Yar's fucking wood, and everyone who works there will never get to any English heaven. I say mole, I mean a deliberate lie, I mean an act of aggression against the thing that sustains the world, ad infinitum, a meagre strip of endless U-turns. He happened upon a postcard from her mole grandmother and climbed into it. It was a grey watercolour and pencil forest, and in there, in the late life lonely work of a man gone to war and come back godly, he found a certain sort of English insanity, faith, totally mad, but beautifully truthful. She smelt it and heard it. Ridiculous scripture. There, 3 is the magic number. I say mole, I mean that rare thing, a true eccentric with a genuinely good heart, kindness, grace. I say mole, but I think I mean pilgrim. He realised he must eat it, all of it. She was hungry, and only by eating a great many things would she start to understand this love that could encompass shame, and was no longer made of country lanes, trees, flowers, and little fellow mammals. I say mole, I mean server, I mean brochure, I mean pixels. Not a mole, more of a wood, more of a community, more of a teenager alone in a room staring at a screen, more a meeting in a little chef, more a surveyor, or an elaborate scam coded into the way a digital advert works, or a pipe, or not a pipe. A mole is a spy, is a green leather seat in a chamber of cyclical exploitation. If you look closely, you'll see the mole is charitable. I say mole, I mean sure start, I mean good things, I mean a good bloke doing his thing, keeping his head down, I mean what a pretentious twat. Less a mole than an intimate examination of the sorbet inside a person's eyelid. I say mole, I mean any child, any parent, any person in a position of responsibility or utter carelessness. I mean prisoner, I mean patient, I mean the architect of a lie and he or she who believes the falsity and suffers while the deceiver profits. I mean the little animal who is rich and getting richer. Mole, mole, caught in a hole. 1 mole, 2 moles, 3 moles, 4. Try to shut us out, there's a mole in the door. For treatments of warts and cysts on the throat, a man taketh a she-mole, and for a woman a he-mole. And by setting by a good fire, let the party put the mole's head in his mouth, and biting it, suck the blood out of the mole's mouth as a lively treatment for warts and cysts on the throat. Mole as English fact, as in how we keep changing and have always been like this. lie mole, history mole. King Mole's tragic vicious campaign against himself. I say mole, I mean news. I say mole, you have a fairly good sense of who it is. I mean us.